everybody, and thank you for coming. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be here, and it's kind of a convenient and auspicious time because I just yesterday got the cover for the book that's coming out in October. And I even hate to predict that because it's been a long, long road getting here. It's been several years. And Janie introduced it fairly well in that this particular book and what I'm going to talk about today is about these elusive dichos. And you know, there's been a lot of books and lectures and discussions about dichos, and it was kind of a challenge to me to imagine a way to do it that was different, because people have been collecting dichos forever. And you know, I mean, the first kind of published collection, although it wasn't formally just of dichos, Don Quixote is full of dichos. In fact, a number of the ones in my list can be traced to Don Quixote or some similar variation of them. So they've been around a long time. They're very prevalent in the Latin American world, in the whole Spanish-speaking world. They're more than folk sayings kind of summarizes it, but they're kind of deep in the culture and the language. I was just in Spain in October, and since these dichos have been floating in my mind and dominating my life, I floated a few of them out to people out there, and it was very matter of fact. Oh yeah, we have a dicho just like that, or very similar. You know, it didn't surprise them at all, and they are much more part of the living language there, as they remain so in large parts of Latin America. I was also just in Mexico in December and floating a lot of dichos around there to see people's reaction. And there are so many of them, and they're multiplying. It's not something that's strictly an artifact. There's modern day dichos, and people are inventing all the time. So it's part of the language, part of the ethos of the culture to have these pithy little sayings that go along with daily life. But having said all that, they also are less and less in use, particularly in New Mexico. And I can say that when I was growing up, my grandmother used them frequently in her conversation in daily life, and it was often a way of teaching, of training, of trying to inculcate some morals in us, which she failed utterly, but some of the dichos remained. But as I tell in the book, and I can't tell you all or you won't buy the book, so I'll leave some things out. I didn't pay that much attention to them, and I certainly couldn't remember any more than a few as I grew up and left home and went out in the world and reflected on all those great things I grew up with and took for granted, like we do. And when I came back, I had been away for about 10 years. I came back and I've been working on a bunch of Chimayó projects since then. But my mother had very cleverly beginning back in the 1950s at her own initiative, she had begun writing down dichos that her mother used, my grandmother. And she had almost 300 of them. And these were they just occurred to her and she jotted them down. And so she had this great list, this compilation of dichos that were just sitting there. And what's remarkable about them, besides the fact that she collected them all, is the fact that they come from one woman in one place. Nearly 300. And who knows how many weren't included in that list, because she certainly doesn't remember all of them. And I can attest to that because almost daily, she'll call me and say, "Donnie, I thought of another dicho." And then we have these hilarious conversations. She'll call me in the morning and say, "I woke up last night and I had a dicho on the tip of my tongue and I didn't write it down and I can't remember it." And so we'll spend the days, was it about a dog? No. So anyway, so I really have to thank her. None of this project would have occurred In fact, I would have never occurred if it had been for my mother. And I wish she was here. She couldn't make it today. But it was really her effort, which I think was really a brilliant bit of insight, to see the value in those folk sayings, and many other things she gathered, by the way. I'll just tell you a little aside. I might as well abandon my notes immediately. Another thing she collected, and I've talked about these before, is that she had inherited all the family documents going back to, we have documents from Chimayó going back to 1706. And these, by coincidence, happen to number about 300 as well. But years ago, when she was still living in Los Alamos, she was pulling out of her driveway one fine day in 2000, and she saw smoke over the mountains, and she pulled back in the driveway. She was going to visit her mother in Chimayó, and she thought, what if that fire comes to my house? There was no indication it would. It was not panic time yet. What's the one thing I would take? Because she was leaving for about 5 days to stay with my grandmother. She went back in the house, and the one thing she took was that back box of documents. And that's the only thing that survived. The house burned down. So she's pretty good about preserving important stuff. And also because, the trend during her lifetime and mine has been to leave that stuff behind. There was a really powerful urge and drive towards what's often called Americanization in the northern New Mexico communities, because it was incumbent upon people to Americanize in order to participate in the economy, in order to succeed. So there was a real concerted effort to leave behind a lot of the culture and language and embrace English and embrace all things that were coming in and changing New Mexico. So much so that when I was growing up, we were forbidden, my mom made me strike that word in the text, we were discouraged from speaking Spanish at all in the house. And so we had this ironic situation where my mother and grandma would be chattering in Spanish, and I'd come in and happen to utter a Spanish word, they'd stop and say, "Don't speak Spanish." And we'd go back to chatting away in Spanish. So in that atmosphere, to preserve and protect these was really wise of her. And she largely, a lot of the culture has been lost. A lot of these dichos have been, forgotten. So it's really a privilege to be able to put them down on paper, which is the only way we're going to remember them anymore. We have too much stuff packed in our brains. Like my grandma used to say, good memories are a thing of the past. But so I realized I had this treasure of an inheritance that I had to work with. I had to figure out what to do with it, but I couldn't keep it simple. The initial idea, because I'm a photographer, was I'll just have dichos and photographs. And the photographs will evoke something of the culture of the place, and the dichos will reflect that in some way. So I started out with that in mind. I began to take pictures going around Chimayó. And I ventured into places I had never been before in Chimayó, which was quite an experience for me. I'd grown up really pretty sheltered in one little part of town that was the most cultured, best part of town where all the smartest people lived, according to my grandmother. So we were discouraged from going away from that plaza. All the little neighborhoods are called plazas. But I felt like I'd written a lot about the Plaza del Cerro, where my family is from, and I wanted to venture out into other plazas. So that immediately added a layer of complexity and challenge. I began to venture around Chimayó and poke into neighborhoods where I had no family affiliation that I knew of. And that was really an education to me, and it became something of an adventure to keep pushing that edge and going into places that I had been told were dangerous, and they were dangerous, some of the more run-down neighborhoods and places that, as a kid, I was always told to avoid. I remember my grandmother always talking about to avoid the albahaños, Remember the Alajeños? I have my cousin Letty here who still lives in Chimayo. Yeah, the Alajeños, the ones from down below, watch out for them because they talk funny and they dress funny. So I found myself going down to Plaza Abajo to explore and find out what it was all about down there. And one of the things I ran into right away is that I did have connections in all these places. And it was really amazing to me to find out that there's just such a network of family and other kinds of connections that are so deep because everybody's been there for several centuries. So they've all got a lot of dirt on each other, and they all know each other a little too well. So anyway, that was one of the things I discovered, and one of the things I began to do just instinctively is to immediately introduce myself to people by saying, I'm Don Usner, and before anything could happen, I could say, my mom is Stella Chavez, so they could connect me with a local name. And that always opened some doors immediately, and often ended up that we were relatives. And as Enrique Lamadrid, who's been an advisor for this whole book project, pointed out to me, in every sort of tribal culture, that's the first thing you do when you meet somebody. In Spanish, it's called ubicarse, to locate yourself in the community of people there. So I would do this, and I started to feel like I needed to be well-versed in the family relations so I could call up some names to people to point out, that I was okay. And so I began to study the genealogy much more carefully, and it was remarkable. And so I got kind of good at it, and I was going to give you an example here of how it goes. I'm trying to find that page. I could give you an example with me. Here's an example when I pulled out some family relations when I ran into this guy. This happened to be on the Plaza de Cerro, and I know that everybody in my generation has forgotten all this. And so I ran into him, and Terry from the Plaza. And I said to him, I decided I was going to lay it out for him, how we were related. So I said, see, Terry, your grandfather, Pedro Trujillo's father, Vidal Trujillo, was a son of Concepcion who lived in Rio Chiquito and was married to my great-great-grandma's sister, Maria Antonia Ortega, Gervasio's daughter. Vidal grew up in your house with his grandparents, Guadalupe and Gervasio. So Pedro and my great-grandfather were primos hermanos, first cousins, and that makes us cousins too. I looked at him for his reaction. He said, no kidding. He says it just goes to show you can't pick your relatives. So that one kind of fell flat for me. And I can give you another one. This is one, and these are verbatim. I actually recorded this. So this may be a bit tedious, but I really wanted to include it because it's real. This is the depth to which people understand their relationship to each other in place. And my mom begged me to cut this from the book. She said, people are going to fall asleep. They're going to be bored. And I said, well, that's too bad because it's something that has been forgotten. It's worth remembering. So this is a little bit long, and I'm trying not to drag it out too long. So we met this guy. We were driving around Chimayo like we've done a lot. We just venture into Chimayo and kind of see what happens and explore neighborhoods. And she decided to look for an old relative's house that we couldn't find it because there's all trailer homes and houses have fallen down. So we saw a guy working on an old truck, and we flagged him down, and we started speaking to him, and then it came to a point where they recognized something in common. So his name is Aron. Is Aron here? A good thing. Okay. So he said, oh, hi. Of course I know who you are, but I don't know if we've met. Aron says, assuming a more formal tone when he addresses my mother. I'm Cordelia and Esteban's son. Yes, I remember Esteban from the Plaza, Jose Inez's son. He was our relative somehow. My mother always called him Primo Jose Inez, my mom answers. It was through the Ortegas, Aaron explains. How's that, says my mom. On my father's side, Aron continues, my grandfather was second cousin to Jose Ramon Ortega. My great-grandpa, mom interjects. Yes, my father's grandmother, Maria Antonia Ortega, Jose Ramon's sister, was married to Concepcion Trujillo Rio Chiquito. And on the other side, my other grandfather's father, Cristobal Martinez, married a daughter of Pedro Asensio Ortega. Really? My mom says. Pedro Asensio, that was Graviel Ortega's son. That goes way back, my mother says, alluding to the fact that Graviel first settled in Chimayo in the early 1700s. But I remember now we were also related to your mother, Cordelia. Her father, Toribio Trujillo, was a brother to Severiano and Nicolas. Severiano married Zenaida, my grandpa's sister, so we were connected that way through marriage. I'm quickly losing track of who's who. That's right, Arangozan, but it goes way back farther than that. Maria Francisco Ortega, who was born in 1797 to Jose Manuel Pablo Ortega, and Ana Maria Gonzalez married Jose del Carmen Trujillo. Their son was Jose Concepcion Trujillo from Rincon, not to be confused with Jose Concepcion Trujillo from Rio Chiquito. Their son Toribio was my mother's father. And actually, Severiano, who, like you said, married your great-great-aunt Zenaida, was only half-brother to Toribio. See, Toribio's mother was Chonita Coriz. Severiano's mother was Josefa Pacheco. Chonita came from Santa Fe as a girl, as a servant in Josefa and Jose Concepcion's house. After Josefa died, Concepcion married the servant, Chonita, my grandpa Toribio's mother. I didn't know that, my mom comments. And at this point, I'm completely lost in a Gordian knot and don't even know what she doesn't know. I just knew we were related to the Trujillos of Rincon through Severiano. We considered his brothers, including Toribio, Nicolas, and others, to be tios. We didn't know Toribio was only a half-brother to them. Well, Toribio had 10 half-brothers in all, and only one sister, Aron explains. I found out by studying my genealogy. Anyway, my mom concludes, that's why my mother called your grandfather Primo. Then for sure we're cousins, I say, making the only statement I'm confident of. And that's one of the simpler ones. And actually one of these elaborate webs of relations, the way I've constructed the book, it opens, the second chapter is a meeting with a woman, and they go through this torturous thing. And then at the end of the book, we're back with her again, and the subject comes up again, and we go through the same thing again. It's a rehearsal. It's not like anybody ever knows it for good. It's like every meeting you're going to rehearse, you're going to remind each other, you're going to remember those individuals and those relationships. So it became really, really remarkable for me, because I could walk into a neighborhood and, somebody would greet me with never, violently, but not exactly warmly. And then before we knew it, we found out we were primos or some other facsimile that put us through there. This is another example of a connection that was remarkable and surprising through a different non-familial channel. This is, I met a guy named Tom Montoya, who became a real great friend and important person in this whole project. So this is from the book. Tom is one of 5 children of Maria. Their father just died 2 years ago, and Maria is not doing so well. But the family's rallying around her, with 3 taking the lead and caring for her. Tom is one of those 3, and he's proud of it. He asks about my family, and then stops me when I tell him my grandmother's name. You're Benigna Chavez's grandson? That was your grandma? He asks, and then he says, I know her. She's from up there in the plaza, no? I bought her washing machine. I said, no, you're kidding. You're the one who got that old machine? Yes, in 1980, I heard this old lady was selling it, and I picked it up for $100. It was a good price, That old machine with the rollers, the Maytag roller, I asked. Yes, that's the one. And I say, I used to do laundry on it when I was little. Well, I still use it, he says. I said, well, where is it? And he leads me behind his house, down the driveway, and pulls off a couple of old handmade rag rugs. And there it is, the old Maytag with the rollers, looking just like it did when Grandma had it in her screen porch. There's no rust on it, and Tom says it still works just fine. So we had a major connection there, and we were friends. And then it turned out it just keeps going on and on. His wife's grandmother was my great-great-aunt's sister. So we had another relation there. So that was really a remarkable discovery for me. And so through this whole process, we were discussing that the putative purpose was to work out these dichos, because we had the list of 300 of them. Believe me, it's not easy to manage 300 dichos. To try and keep track of them, translate them all, keep the translations all current, keep them organized, and all that stuff. So we were constantly going over them, talking about them. So they were floating through all these conversations as we took our little adventures through Chimayo. So what it evolved to be, rather than just a list of dichos and a series of pictures, was these intertwined stories of a journey through a place, a journey through a culture and a language, and a journey through identity. It became, for me, a real reconnection with some roots that I had really, not been, I thought I had been familiar with, but it really deepened my connection to my family and history there in remarkable ways. And it also really pointed out to me how odd it was the way I grew up. Because I lived in Los Alamos part of the time, and I went to Chimayo a lot of the time. And I don't think you could find two more divergent places in New Mexico for sure, maybe on the planet, I don't know. And so I began to really appreciate, on a much more macro scale, the kind of transition that had gone on in northern New Mexico with culture, which I was really a part of. I was really in that real transition and changing of the dominant culture. And I was always going back and forth between these cultures. And I had always been raised to devalue what Chimayo had to offer and to really extend myself in this other world that we grew up with. My friend Bruce in Los Alamos, he suffered through that as well. And so it became kind of a story that intertwined all those different elements. And it started out as a simple idea. It became more and more complex and complicated. And that's why it's taken me 6 years to come to this point where it's finally going to be presented. And we'll see what happens to it. And it's also another piece of the story that's this incredibly delightful interaction with my mother, spending a lot of time together exploring her roots. And she had also kind of left them behind and forgotten. And so it was really funny. We'd go to places in Chimayo where she had never been herself, and she didn't know anything about them, and she was a bit frightened. But I made it a point to take her right into places that worried her the most. And we had some real interesting times doing that. I remember the time we pulled I made a wonderful friend whose picture I'll show you if I don't run out of time here. His name is Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, he had led a very rustic life. His house, he'd built it himself, and all his cars were 50 years old and held together with baling wire. And we rolled into his driveway. My mom drives a brand new Infiniti Honda, so we pulled in the driveway and stopped, and he came out, and he was just completely dumbfounded. Like, who could this possibly be? And we rolled down the windows, and he looked in, and just this amazing, mire nomás, mira quién está. He was so happy to see us, and there was this incredible embrace and exchange that to me was really meaningful, because he represented to me, and I think to my mother, a whole piece of our culture that we'd kind of just pushed away, and it was still there and with wide open arms, ready to welcome us right back, where she left off. She really moved away from there, 70 years ago. And it's gone back a lot to visit her mother, but not really explored these old friends and relationships. So that was a really fun part of it. And then there were the constant stories that came up, stories are so much a part of place. Stories define place. They define character. And so she would tell me great stories about people and events, and some of the best ones she wouldn't allow me to reproduce in print. And I tried to nevertheless, but when she threatened to disown me, I had to back off a little bit. But there were a lot of really clever, funny, interesting stories, and I realized that what was happening was this transmission of so much information, so much culture, and so much stuff that would be lost if I didn't record it. Because, again, we don't tell the stories like we used to. We don't use the dichos like we used to. And so in some ways, this whole thing is creating a historic document. But I was going to tell you one of the stories that she told me that I found particularly delightful. And my grandmother used to tell me this too. One day I took her to see this remarkable little shrine on the little back road of Chimayo. It was really a beautiful little handmade shrine that was crumbled down. There was a wrecked car parked next to it. But inside it was full of devotions, and people had been visiting it and taking care of it. And I wanted to show this to my mom. And another theme that ran through this whole thing was running into people that made us very nervous at first. It turned out to be wonderful people. That's happened to me over and over again. But in this particular case, my mom was with me, and she said, well, we don't know who that shrine belongs to. You can't just walk on their property. And I wanted to go photograph it. So she said, well, there's a house, let's go knock on the door. So I went to the house, knocked, nobody answered. And then this big truck rolled up, and it had tires about this big. And the windows were all tinted, so I couldn't see what was happening inside. And I was kind of quaking, and my mom was going, let's get out of here. Then the door opened, and this woman dressed, it was a Sunday, so she was dressed for church. She had a necklace on and a beautiful dress, and she had raven black hair and the most radiant face you could imagine. It was a beautiful smile, probably in her 80s or 70s, and she just stepped down and was like, hi, what are you doing here? And then her son came out. It was a big, burly-looking guy with cowboy boots, and thought he was going to run me off. And they were so happy that we were interested in their little shrine, and showed it to us and welcomed us to it. And that kind of happened over and over again in many different contexts. And that's some of the stories I tell in the book. But right after visiting this shrine, while I was at the shrine, this is what happened. I spent a few minutes at the shrine, mindful of the admonition I received from Juan Trujillo to be sure and pray when I visit holy places and not just snap a bunch of pictures. So I paused for a moment of silence while Mom watches from the car. A prayer that I learned from Grandma comes to me. Con Jesús me acuesto, con Jesús me levanto, con la Virgen María y el Espíritu Santo. And along with that little prayer comes a joke that both Grandma and Mom used to tell. It goes something like this. It seems there was a young man in the plaza who wasn't quite right in the head. And when he or similar characters came up in conversation, Grandma had several dichos at hand, as usual, such as le falta un real para el peso y la mitad de la semana, which means he's a quarter short of $1 and missing half the week. Or she'd say, le falta un tornillo, he's missing a screw. But anyway, one night, this guy who was missing a screw and his mother knelt to pray, reciting the prayer I just recalled, which translates, with Jesus I lay down, and with Jesus I rise, with the Virgin Mary and the Holy Spirit. At which point the young man interjected, you liar, you lay down with Dad and you get up with him too. When Grandma told that story, she would always wink and conclude with the dicho, los locos y los chiquitos dicen la verdad. Crazy people and little children tell the truth. So this was like this multifaceted thing going on that evolved into this story of the book. And how am I doing on time? I should start showing some pictures. Yeah. So.
You've got about half an hour done.
Oh, okay. So this is just a couple pictures to illustrate that kind of divergent cultural past I came from. This is my great-grandfather, Jose de los Reyes Ortega. This is a picture taken by Laura Gilpin. And I had a small grant when I was working on Sabino's map to go to Laura Gilpin's collection in Fort Worth at the, what's the name of the museum? Amy Carter, yeah. So I looked through every single one of her negatives she ever made, and I found all the ones from Chimayo. And this was labeled unnamed weaver in Chimayo. So this is my great-grandfather. And this is him in his weaving studio. He was the first to open a weaving studio in Chimayo. And this is my dad at Los Alamos National Lab. So you can see the contrast between the two worlds that I came from. He was an electrical engineer who was completely fascinated with science and math and gadgets and various other sundry things. And this is my grandfather, Victor Ortega, at his loom. Now this is me. Extremely embarrassing. But the reason I put it in is because as kids we were not taught a thing about the history of our own place. You know, and so in 4th grade I learned the Mexican hat dance. And they dressed me up like this. And what's really ironic is that my family, the Ortegas, were some of the best weavers in the world. And we have blankets that they've woven and rugs and fantastic things. They got me this little cheap thing from Mexico. Not that Mexico doesn't also produce fine arts, but this isn't some of it. And this big hat. And it was ridiculous. And I felt ridiculous. But that was the history we were taught, instead of what was part of us and what was in front of us and what was us. So this is more typical of what you didn't see in Chimayo. You wouldn't see the Mexican hat dance. This is a penitente in the Arroyo in Chimayo, and he's involved in one of the annual rituals that used to take place there. I think this one's called Las Tres Caídas, but anyway, I found that a remarkable contrast, that we were taught about these traditions that were really foreign to us, and we were never taught about the ones that were in our own family and backyard. And this was really driven home for me. I wasn't allowed to speak Spanish, but it was okay to learn French. So I studied French all through high school. And finally, in high school, I said, I'd like to take a Spanish class. So I went to Spanish in high school. And the first thing the teacher said to me when I walked in the door was, "Hola, ¿qué tal?" And I'd never heard any of those words before. And you would be a laughingstock, Chimayo, if you said hola to anybody. They'd immediately label you as a dang foreigner south of the border. It was a completely different dialect. And the teacher was not too interested in me learning, including the kind of Spanish I knew in the class. It was just not allowed. So I left high school speaking French, and I knew a lot of bad words in Spanish. So these are a few pictures from around Chimayo. Obviously, the santuario was a very big influence, or a big part of living in Chimayo was going to the santuario. This is one of the mysterious santuario angels that appear occasionally. I've got him on film a couple of times. But this was built by my 5th great-grandfather, who's also led his 5th great-grandfather, I believe. Yeah, through the Ortegas. Bernardo Aveta was his name. And nobody ever told me in my whole upbringing that he had been the one who built this place. Wow. I found it out later when I studied history in college. So I'm going to run through a bunch of pictures here, just kind of randomly as I talk. So it's going around Chimayo meeting people, all kinds of people, all kinds of stories. This is a family that lives in Potrero, and I'm forgetting his name. I can't believe it now. He was my grandma's first cousin, and I love the way when they posed, they had to include the entire family, including a dog and the calf. A really, really, really remarkable guy who ended up we ended up, I worked with the Trust for Public Land to buy his property, and it's now Santa Fe County open space, which is cool. These old barns we used to play in when we were kids, and they're all collapsed now. This is one of the last ones. This picture I have published many times. This is my grandma's prima Mercedes in her huerta. This was a way of life that was still very vibrant when I was ill, but slowly disappeared. This is one of the guys that I met through this project. His name is Benedito, and Benedito is quite a character. He's there looking at my book called Sabino's Map, which he had never seen, and I gave him a copy. And as I say in the book, one of Benedito's defining characteristics, besides he's really charming, is he's a master of profanity. I learned a lot from Benedito. But one day I pulled up and he didn't know my mother was in the car. And he came over and he started with his usual string of expletives, which very commonly a greeting in Chimayo in this neighborhood amongst good friends is cabron. So I pulled him and said, "Hey, cabron," and he started going on and on. And then he noticed my mother was in the car. And he backed up and said, "Oh, disculpe me. And he was more decent. Then he forgot she was there. And he just went like that. Anyway, Benedito, like many people, let me into his life and shared just openly, generously, amazingly of his stories, of his food, of his table, and it's just a remarkable story. This is Ezekiel. And Ezekiel Trujillo, I had seen him around Chimayo. He cuts a very striking figure, and I'd always wanted to talk to him, but had never really met him until one day my mother and I just knocked on the door of a friend that she hadn't seen in 20 years, and there was Ezekiel. And Ezekiel at this point was about 82, 83, and his cousin, who we went to see, was 99, and he had come to take care of her for the day. And they were just sitting in there. They were all dressed up very nicely and just chatting very politely. And we dropped in on them, and it was just a fantastic kind of reunion, remembering each other, and went through a whole dialogue with him. His great-grandfather's brother married my great-grandfather's sister's sister, and blah, 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 blah. And then the woman he was taking care of was my grandma's student in grade school in it would have been about 1918. So we had a lot of discussions about that. And then it turned out Ezekiel is a matachine dancer. And he's the last one in Chimayo. And our whole dialogue and relationship subsequently revolved around him telling me about that experience. Well, there's Modesto again. His name is Modesto. And those are those fields in Potrero. I love the fence in here. This is the Plaza del Cerro. This is where my family was from, and I've done a lot of writing about it. And we revisited it many times, including the old oratorio there, the chapel, which is a really remarkable place. This is Benedito when he worked at what we call the dump. It's a transfer station. And so he was everybody's acquaintance because he knew everybody and their garbage. And so he was a great guy there. And this was his, there's a guy I ran into at the dump, the transfer station one day, who turned out to also be his great-great-grandmother was my great-great-grandfather's wife, so we were related. This is the interior of the oratorio, and there's a lot of history here, a lot of stories, one of which revolves around the story of this rope hanging here. And it's a very sad story, and it's one of the things I decided to include in the book was that the dark side. As we all know, Chimayo has a very dark side, and its reputation is very mixed. In fact, I opened the whole story by saying this place has one of the most mixed reputations of any place in terms of light, and dark. And there's kind of a dark story that goes along with this rope in the chapel. I can't go into it entirely, but basically it's become a focal point for a kind of a battle around historic preservation, development, and maintaining traditional ways in Chimayo. And the bell from the chapel has been stolen twice, and the bultos from inside have been stolen. I joined with a bunch of people, and we put a new bell up, and we rang it, and there was a community reunion. It was beautiful, and then a year later the bell was stolen again, and the rope was left laying inside like this. And so there's a whole dialogue around that kind of undercurrent that runs throughout Chimayo. It's very real and very difficult to understand, but I try and explain and talk about it somewhat. Here on the roof of the ceiling of the oratorio, people have inscribed their names, and in 1876 they inscribed their names and they re-roofed it. And my mother and I had a wonderful time here looking at the names, and they were, alive in 1876. She could still place most of them in this network that she had been taught to memorize through her lifetime. These are some pictures on the wall of a house I visited on the plaza, and it's typical of the artwork and what people put on the walls, but I really liked when he captioned the picture. It says, Antonio Martinez, grandfather of Lorenzo Martinez, who lives in the Plaza de Cerro. So he has a real pride about the fact he still lives there, and this was his grandfather. And there he is. And you can see that, I think, something of a resemblance. And this connection was great too, because he had forgotten, but I remembered my grandmother was his godmother. And so when we were little, we always used to make visits to him and bring him little presents and cookies and stuff like that. And his mother was a wonderful friend. So, we had this great bond that wasn't through blood, but through what they call compadrazgo, through the godfather-godchild relationship. I have a few landscapes in here. That's the Old Plaza. This is the Pocito in the Santuario. A lot of family stories about that. And this is Modesto. He was wont to pontificate. And I love the fact he has Jesus, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and a dollar bill. But I don't know if you can see it from there, but Jesus is pictured in it. He was always lecturing me. That's his property as seen from the hills, the Potreros there. And that's looking right down the Rio Quemado towards Chimayo. This is Lawrence's couch. And one of the things I ran into is that a lot of the people, a much slower lifestyle. And one of the people I'll show you, and Lawrence was like this too, they have old furniture positioned around the property conveniently, so you can always just find a nice seat. This is Esperanza. Ezekiel was in the background. We took care of her. And this is how she greeted us after not seeing my mother for 20 years. Magdalena, not Esperanza. That's Magdalena. This is an old neighborhood I ventured into. Jane, if you can give me like a 5-minute warning so I can talk really fast. This is a part of Chimayo that is known as La Otra Banda, the other bank, because it's across the river, so we call it La Otra Banda. And this is where Benedito lived. This was his uncle's house. And again, venturing into that dark part of Chimayo, I think it's a beautiful old historic structure, and Benedito said, go take all the pictures you want, go explore it, spend time there. I went back many times, and then I noticed it had burned inside the walls and ceiling were burned, and I asked Benedito what had happened. And he said, well, my uncle burned to death. He was an alcoholic, and he was so saturated with alcohol, laying in bed and a cigarette, he basically immolated. And it's just such a sad story. And it came about because he said, why do you want to go to that house? We don't go near it. It's considered kind of haunted. They won't even venture into it because of that kind of dark history that's so common in many neighborhoods in Chimayo. This is inside Benedito's brother's house, and I just loved it because the decor is so completely haphazard, but it's lovely in its own way. And this is a version of Guadalupe beach towel. And I asked him, I said, well, where'd you get that? And he said, at the dump, where do you think? Where do I get anything? This is one of those revelations. I was at a little chapel called the San Antonio Chapel, and this was a reflection in the window. Just a marvelously beautiful little place. It's on a hilltop. All the little chapels there are on hilltops, and one of the things I noticed was that if you look at the old buildings, only the chapels were on hilltops. They were reserved places for the spirit. But now that they have big bulldozers and can pump water, they're leveling the hilltops and putting up house trailers and so forth. But this is one of those sacred spots I visited many times. This is my great aunt. You recognize her? That's Letty's grandma's sister, and my grandma's sister. This was another wonderful thing that happened. We were visiting Gravielita. Gravielita was 99 in this picture. Her husband was my grandmother's cousin, and I grew up visiting her a lot when I was little. And these were what she called her babies. Her babies. She said, everybody lives close except for my two babies in Albuquerque. They'd come up to visit for the day. So Gravielita we hadn't seen since my grandmother died in 2001 when she was 103. And we hadn't seen Gravielita since then. And our reunions with her were so wonderful. It's hard to describe the conversation. And she's just a charming, wonderful person. And her family was all close by and wonderful there. And one day, she made me a cup of coffee, and she warned me. She said, you better like really strong coffee. Because the way she put it, she said, this is really going to kick you. And it was. She drinks it all day long, this thick, black, dense stuff. And I figured that's her secret. So that's the San Antonio Chapel where the reflection in the window was. This is Ezekiel at his house. Truly remarkable man. And what I remembered about him, his father was named Don Benigno, and Don Benigno was a sobador, who was a masseuse, but he was also a licensed chiropractor. And he healed everybody, all over northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. And we made that connection because he had helped my grandmother a lot with her knee. And the joke was, my grandmother used to say, that Don Benigno, when he was working on all the old ladies, which was mainly his clients, that he'd start working on their knees, and he used to keep saying in Spanish, I think the injury is just a little higher. And they said that they used to just have to slap him, but they never sent him away. So this is Ezekiel in his house. And I could tell a whole long story about him. This is his wife who died in childbirth and left him to raise the kids by himself. And he worked at the power plant in northwest New Mexico. He commuted to Chimayo, and his father Benito took care of the kids. And he has this amazing life story of just utter devotion and dedication. And he was also the last matachina dancer. And this is him showing me the corona that his father gave him, that he had brought from San Juan Pueblo, where his father lived at San Juan for a while. So he told me this whole wonderful story about the matachines, and he showed me in the back room. He has all the traje, all the costumes for the dances, and he led them for many years. And then there's that sad twist. He had cultivated his nephew patiently to take over. He was in his early mid-20s. And his nephew died of a drug overdose just shortly before I met him. So he would become incredibly animated and just so happy talking about this. And then he'd always reach that point where he realized what had happened, and he put it all down and said, I'm not going to do it anymore. I can't. But he was a wonderful guy. He's since passed away. And he took me out to... when he was feeding his horses one day. This was Don Benito's house where he was born. Ezekiel was born. This is Juan Trujillo who lives right near the San Antonio Chapel, he's the one who told me, you better be praying up there and not just taking pictures. And he meant it too, and I never have forgotten that. But he's wearing a hat that says Orgulloso Chimayoso, which means proud Chimayoso. And he's one of these guys from Potrero, which is one of those neighborhoods Grandma warned me about. And it's true. She always said they use a lot of bad language over there, and they dress too colorfully. And it's true, Benedito and Juan both live there, and they both, first thing they say to me is cabron, as soon as they see me. But he's also got a reputation as being kind of a really tough guy, and he had just recently enforced his prerogatives as a mayordomo of the ditch and beat up a guy in his 20s and ran him off. That's the story he told me, and I haven't heard. If you take a look at his hand, you could probably do it. But anyway, I've known him my whole life, and he's a sweet, sweet guy. And so I was thinking of what a big, tough guy he's supposed to be, and then this little chihuahua came and jumped in his lap. And this is him by his old truck. He's the last guy left in the valley. He still makes miel de caña. He makes syrup from sorghum. He has a big press. He's an animal to press it. He took me to his despensa, which is all full of herbs and seeds and chili, and gave me bags full of stuff to take home. There he is, fishing through his stuff. This is Ezekiel. I loved it. Feeding his horses, using a snow shovel. Anything that works. And this is the matachine traje in his back room, which now, since he's dead, is just sitting there. I don't know what's going to become of it. This is one of the most remarkable places. There was a man named Patricio Cruz who lived here. He died when he was 104. And he herded goats his whole life. And I always wanted to see his house. It's sitting there on a hill by itself. There's no road access. He never had a car. And there's no running water. There's no plumbing. But finally I got over there with a neighbor of his, and it was just amazing. Inside, the door was held shut like that. I'll get back to it. This is Aaron Martinez, who I quoted with the genealogy. This is Ezekiel's truck. And he died on a Friday, and I was out of town. I came back Monday. All those materials had been scavenged from around the truck. As soon as he died, it was like, he's gone. Might as well use that stuff. It was all gone. And then the truck is fixed up and running now. And I could go on and on with stories here. This was. I'll close with this one just because it was such an unusual thing. One day I was driving around with a friend of mine, Sam Adams, and we saw this biker party going on. And I said, that would sure be cool pictures, but I don't think I'll go in there. He said, why not? What can happen? And I said, well, let me get my list out here. But we pulled in, and this was kind of the first greeting we got. And, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm taking pictures. I'm going to work on a book, which is what I told everybody. And then this guy came out, and it was, a lot of bad language. What do you think you're doing here? And this guy, that says Chima on his arm. But then Sam got out of the car, and this guy named Victor Serrano, he said, what are you doing? Sam said, I'm a photographer. And he said, Sam Adams? And Sam said, no, not the beer. Not the beer. But Victor said, I know your work. And Sam and I looked at each other, right, he knows our work, he knows Sam's work. He said, no, in Madrid, as they say, you had a show 2 years ago, black and white pictures, and there was a tango dancer. I love that tango dance. And so he says to everybody, these guys are cool. And so we hung out there for a couple of hours. And then an old lady came out who we had talked, she knew me, and she knew my family, and we were all cool. It was really great. They were really nice people. And inside, there was a tattoo artist working. And he's from Mexico, and he had just done this. These were still bleeding. But he took me in there. I love this because there's Hernan Cortez. And he looks like the mad tattooist. Anyway, I want to close with just, because I haven't even mentioned any dichos yet. So I'm just going to close with a few of them. And what I ended up doing was grouping them according to subjects. And so it turned out when I did that most of them, probably 30% were dichos about character. Just advice about how to behave or how bad people behaved. And then the other big chunk was consejos, which are just counsel. So I'll just read to a few of the ones about character. El que con lobos anda ayudar se enseña. He goes around with wolves, learns to howl. And this one I love. When somebody's boasting or criticizing somebody, and they have the same mission themselves, you say, es como el burro hablando de orejas. It's like the donkey talking about ears. Es más lo que habla que lo que dice. He talks more than he says. And this is one I really loved as a kid because I had to think about it. No vale ni un cero a la izquierda. He's not even worth a zero on the left side. And another one for somebody who thinks he's really smart is tiene más entradas que salidas. He has more entries than exits. And then a few consejos. Después del burro muerto, maíz para el burro, para qué sirve? After the donkey is dead, what good will feeding him corn do? In other words, it's too late to fix the damage done. And this is one that really applied for this book. Del dicho al hecho, hay un gran trecho. From doing to saying, there's a long space. En boca cerrada no entra mosca. A fly can't get into a closed mouth. En la ciudad de los ciegos, el tuerto es rey. In the city of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And then, I don't have it written down here. No hay quien escupa al cielo que no le caiga en la cara. There's nobody who spits into the air that it doesn't fall in his face. So, which reminds me of a Chinese proverb very similar. Spit straight up, learn something. So that's about it. And thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everybody.